TikTok's lawyers had really tried to argue this was a First Amendment case. Are you surprised at all by this ruling?
I'm not, for a couple of reasons. First, Anna, anybody who watched that oral argument, or listened to it rather, would know that the justices were deeply suspect of the argument that this presented real First Amendment concerns. And even Justice Sotomayor, who concurred in the judgment here, meaning she agrees with the end result, but perhaps for slightly different reasons, says the question we face today is not the law's wisdom, only its constitutionality. Given just a handful of days after oral argument to issue an opinion, I cannot profess the kind of certainty I would like to have about the arguments and record before us. All I can say is that at this time and under these constraints, the problem, and I want to get back to what the problem is, appears real, and the response to it not unconstitutional. And the problem that Justice Sotomayor is referring to is the national security problem that the government talked about repeatedly in its briefs and at its oral argument. The argument was twofold, that TikTok presents a national security concern in two ways. One, because its owners and the Chinese government, by association, can use it to harvest data about all the people who are using it. And two, the algorithm can be manipulated to push out to users content that the owners, and again, by extension, the Chinese government, wants us to see, allowing them not only to control what we see, but perhaps to have undue influence on our elections and otherwise. So no, I'm not surprised by this result. Do I think this is the end of the story, however? I don't. I think there are a number of things and innings left to play, so to speak, both for Congress and for the incoming president, and maybe even for the Biden administration in its remaining hours to extend the life of TikTok, perhaps find another buyer, and or give them more time to consider what its options are.
I mean, at this point, Brian, this ban goes into effect on Sunday. That's 2 days from now. What can these 170 million Americans who have the app currently use it? There's all of these small businesses that are part of the app and are generating money for the American economy. What can these people expect to happen?
Yeah, well, our understanding was that any sort of company that basically provides TikTok services would not be able to do so starting on Sunday. So what that would look like is not being able to download the app through the App Store on Google or iPhones, and then also not being able to update the app. Now, as far as whether or not, if you already have it installed on your phone, you'd be able to continue scrolling, well, that was an open question, and it actually sounded like the TikTok Council in oral arguments didn't necessarily know if it was going to be operable, at least for those that already have the app. But we just heard from Ryan down in D.C. that was saying that the Biden administration said that it doesn't plan on levying that penalty as written in the law for vendors that would be providing TikTok with those services. So if you were, let's say, an Oracle and you use your servers to allow people to scroll on their phones on this app, well, they might not be penalized if the Biden administration says at least for that one day on Sunday, we won't enforce it, and then allow the Trump administration, once inauguration happens on Monday, to then deal with that issue. If that is the case, there is reason to think that maybe those that have TikTok won't necessarily have their services interrupted. But again, these are big questions. Yeah. The way that this happens in practical terms is very much unknown. It is a weekend as well. I don't know if everyone at TikTok US is going to be in the office on that day. A lot of outstanding questions. But again, it could be the case that we don't see any difference on Sunday, but it could also be the case that we might see some sort of lag or some sort of interruptions for those that do have the app.
Let me read from the opinion as well. We conclude that the challenged provisions do not violate petitioners' First Amendment rights. The judgment of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit is affirmed. So that, again, just saying essentially this has lost in multiple courts as far as the challenge to the ban. The ban is upheld. That ban set to go into effect on Sunday. Barrett, lots of questions remain then in terms of what's next, because as we've heard, both the Biden administration as well as the incoming Trump administration have expressed their desire to do something that could potentially delay the ban from going into effect. First of all, just your reaction to this ruling, and do you see legal avenues to proceed here?
Yeah, I liked how Lisa said it. I think there definitely are still innings left to play here. I'm not surprised by this opinion. I think after watching the oral arguments and hearing how the justices were signaling how they saw this issue, this isn't surprising, particularly given that the D.C. circuits opinion was very well written, and also by three judges that really were across the ideological spectrum. As far as what comes next, I think there's a lot of question there. So President-elect Trump has indicated that now he is a supporter of TikTok and maybe trying to do things to undo this ban. I think there's several things that could happen, right? I mean, you could imagine a world where President Trump directs his Attorney General Bondi not to enforce this law. I think that would put companies like Apple and Oracle in a really tricky situation. Do they follow the letter of the law, or do they trust the president's assurances that the Justice Department is not going to enforce it? The law also gives President Trump some wiggle room in how he would determine whether or not a divestiture actually or a sale had actually occurred. So one could also imagine a situation where President Trump, who really has touted himself as the ultimate deal maker, gets into the weeds here and tries to help either facilitate some sort of a divestiture or is able to somehow define whether or not a divestiture has happened such that the app can continue to operate in the United States. But I liked that analogy. There are definitely still innings left to play. I think this is still some unsettled questions here.
I mean, could Trump come in on the 20th and issue an executive order, or even Biden, before he leaves, issue an executive order, hit and pause, saying, let's extend the decision to ban at least for a certain number of days?
I mean, I think that's a question. He tried to do that back in the first Trump administration. He tried to ban TikTok by executive order, and that's where the Supreme Court had stepped in and said, actually, we can't do this by executive order. We're in a different position now, so possibly, but I think that would also have to go in front of the court. So it's unsettled.
No doubt. Barrett, please stay with us. Brian, I'm curious if there is any action in terms of somebody potentially swooping in at the last minute and purchasing TikTok from ByteDance.
Yeah, and as Lisa and I have kind of been looking through the opinion, I mean, it's mentioned a number of times that, look, there is a way that TikTok could have avoided all this, which is that they could have divested the company. So I think that now that we have the Supreme Court decision, it's basically upholding the law, which said if TikTok doesn't want to ban and people still want to scroll on TikTok, then ByteDance, which is its Chinese parent company, would just have to sell the company. Now, whether or not there'll be a buyer out there is a question that the Trump administration is going to have to answer. If we know that, let's say, for example, there isn't a disruption to the app on Sunday, again, President Trump gets inaugurated on Monday, and then he could try to find some sort of solution. I think a qualified divestiture is the way that it's described in the law. Maybe it's not a wholesale purchase of the whole company. Maybe it's a substantial stake that's purchased in TikTok US as a subsidiary that would then allow the president to say, you know what, in my view as the president, that basically checks the box of a qualified divestiture. Please carry on. But
are
again,
there serious buyers, though, at this point?
Not that we've really heard of. I mean, there have been some reported rumors that maybe Elon Musk could be someone. Again, this is a very complicated situation because this isn't a phone call from one boardroom to the other. You have the Chinese and also the U.S. government that would be involved here. But what we do know is that it would take time to make that happen. So does that look like perhaps some sort of Trump action to kick the can down the road temporarily to get, let's say, a few extra months to then ink some sort of deal or some sort of a purchase? But again, that's very much uncertain at this time.
To Brian's point, former and future President Trump asked the Supreme Court for exactly that. He wanted a stay to give him time to negotiate a different solution. In their opinion here, and again, this is a unanimous opinion of the court, two justices wrote separately, but they are all in agreement. This is an unsigned opinion. They did not give incoming President Trump what he asked for, a stay of the law. They upheld the law just as it is. So if there is a solution here, either it has to be found in the next couple of days, or we could talk about a solution where, for example, TikTok could go down for a couple of days and then be revived by a qualified divestiture. There are a number of different solutions here, but one of them is not the Supreme Court saying to President Trump, hey, you can press pause because we trust that you can negotiate a different solution to this law than the one that presently exists.
I mean, it sounds like they're saying the law is very clear here. They don't need more time to decipher what the decision should be. And let me read from the opinion. The challenge provisions are facially content neutral. They impose TikTok-specific prohibitions due to a foreign adversary's control over the platform and make divestiture a prerequisite for the platform's continued operation in the United States. They do not target particular speech. based upon its content. Let me bring in Aaron Gilchrist from the White House. And Aaron, we know the Biden administration was trying to maneuver here. Should this be the outcome of the Supreme Court's decision? Should the ban be upheld, or if the possibility the Supreme Court hadn't ruled yet? Do we know what the Biden administration is prepared to do, and what options are there right now as they see it?
Well, effectively, as your guests have noted, the Biden administration is prepared to do nothing. When this law goes into effect on Sunday, two administration officials have told our team that the plan from the Biden administration is not to start doling out billions of dollars in fines to the App Store, to the Apple App Store, to Google Play, if they allow these applications to continue to function on their platforms. We have to sort of step back to the last couple of months of the Biden administration when, for example, the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, has been asked repeatedly if the White House wanted to see this ban go into effect. And she repeatedly said that the White House doesn't want to see a ban. This law calls for a divestiture, and that it expected ByteDance to adhere to the law from that perspective in terms of trying to sell the platform. Obviously, that's something that has not happened. And so in the last several hours, late last night, we learned from some administration sources that the Biden administration does not plan to start fining these companies that support the TikTok platform because they allow it to continue to function. And so I think, given the fact that this does happen on a Sunday, Monday is a federal holiday with the inauguration of the new president, we should not expect to see any action, any movement from the federal government in terms of enforcing this law. Now, it is going to be a law, and therefore it does have to be enforced in some way. At the same time, the understanding that we have at this point is that we won't start to see fines enacted if there is no action taken on part of the technology companies that would be sort of caught up in this law. The Trump team, the transition team for President Trump, has said that this is a platform that he favors. We saw Mike Waltz, the incoming national security advisor for President-elect Trump, say on television just yesterday that that team is actively engaged in trying to figure out how to make sure TikTok does not get shut down here in the United States.